Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of Mid-Tier Thoughts. Coming up on November 5th, which is tomorrow, from the time that I'm recording this, which is late November 3rd, early November 4th. November 5th will be Election Day, the day where we as a country will decide who's going to lead us into the future for the next 4 years, or at least hopefully we decide, and not powerful elites in shadowy places. But we will see. So with that being said, before we continue, I got to give a big shout out to Blackout Coffee. They're an awesome sponsor of ours. They have an awesome code for you to save 20% off your first order of Blackout Coffee. We do get a little bit of kickback from that. That being said, all that money does get reinvested back into the podcast to try to make it better for you guys, as well as back into the YouTube. So give them a shout out. Check them out. Get some awesome coffee for yourself and help support the show while doing it. Now, let's get back to the important stuff. November 5th, which is, the big Tuesday where we all decide who's going to lead us with the popular vote going into the presidency for the next 4 years. We obviously have Kamala Harris on one side and Trump on the other. So with this, we're all going to have to wait and see how this is going to go down. And by the time that some of you may be listening to this, maybe some of what I'm saying will be proven wrong, but putting this out before the election to see one way or the other. I think that in a fair contest, if we leave any kind of cheating or tomfoolery out of it, we're going to see a Trump victory hands down. Based on the polling numbers, based on the political climate, based on the attitudes of everyday people, I strongly believe we are absolutely going to see a Trump victory if everything is fair and square. That being said, anyone who remembers the 2020 election will know that that's probably not going to be the case. There will probably be some type of tomfoolery at either the organized individual or state government style level for certain states that are not big fans of the Trump campaign. We saw in 2020 mystery votes coming in. We saw all kinds of scandals, all kinds of areas where it was like more votes than people that live there, dead people voting, all kinds of craziness. And granted, this kind of stuff happens most elections anyway, but I think it will be a particularly egregious this one, which is why I am 100% encouraging everyone who is listening, if you have not voted yet and you are listening to this before Election Day, please, if you are registered to vote, go cast a ballot. You may have heard this phrase going around, too big to rig, right? I know a lot of people out there think that your vote doesn't matter, but I'm telling you, if we can go out there and put out the numbers to where it would be too impossible for them to cheat, then that just helps us out in the long run. Also, I kind of have this personal thing with me where I feel like if you're not willing to sacrifice a little bit of time to put your name on a paper, to mark out someone's name on a paper and simply cast a ballot, and you won't even get off your couch to go do that, I have a hard time believing that you will actually stand up and fight for your rights when they come to take them if you won't sacrifice a little bit of time when it costs you nothing. How do I believe you're going to do it when it costs you everything? That's just my personal vendetta with that. I think it's way easier to prevent things from going down a cascading path to where we do as modern men and men have to fulfill our role by simply casting a ballot than it is to wait for the system to collapse and start, doing the boogaloo stuff. But that's just my personal business. You do as you wish. That is your right as an American to vote or not participate. That's up to you. Now, all of that being said, when it comes to the cycle for this election, we've already seen a bunch of weird stuff happening. We've seen ballot boxes being attacked. We've seen threats against polling places. We've all seen the TikTok videos and the Instagram videos of people being harassed in line to vote, all kinds of stuff going on, especially depending on the state where they're at. So I 100% expect there to be some issues. On top of that, recently I just read that Washington, Oregon, Nevada, and I think there was another state have called up their National Guards the way it was framed was they called up their National Guards to ensure the integrity of the elections and to hopefully decrease any risk of political violence. So certain states are already preparing for what they believe to be some type of political violence to happen. And more states are, from what I read, planning on potentially calling up their National Guards as well. So it'll be interesting to see what roles they play and how they're being called up. Jay Inslee of Washington State, the governor there, basically he worded his very vaguely, just saying that they will be assisting law enforcement in providing a presence to decrease political violence, but didn't specify exactly what that means or how that looks. So it'll be interesting to see what that necessarily comes out to. It sounds like they're probably going to be stationing people near polling stations and things of that nature, just to ensure that they have the security that they need. So it'll be interesting to see how this plays out across the board. But we also know that this is obviously a very contentious election with a very deciding point in our country for the future of how this will go. My honest opinion on this is that if Kamala wins this election, we will not have free elections again at all. And if we do, it will not be for a very long time. The political powers that be are going to do their thing and try to strip us of more rights and get more power, make it so illegals can vote, basically make it to where on paper, through the rules that they'll create, they'll be able to win every election moving forward, to where it'll just be a one-party state. Unfortunately, I'm afraid that that's where that would go with the Kamala side. With the Trump side, I have my own personal issues with some of the things that Trump did in the last election, some of the anti-gun stuff that he did with the last election. I do, however, think that he is the better option of the two. I think he will also be the better option for a better economy and better relations with other countries worldwide. Now, all of that being said, let's get down to what this actually matters to you. I would assume, as most people I've been hearing from have also assumed, that realistically, no matter who's going to win, it's going to be a rough ride for a little bit. And I don't just mean economically. I mean, we've got people politically divided enough to the point that neither side wants the other side to win, to the point that they are willing to go to blows over it. Now, to what extent and to how violent that would look, who knows? It could be something similar to the BLM summers that we experienced in 2020, with riots in the streets and police being overwhelmed with mass rioting. It could be street violence. It could be all kinds of things. It could be any number of mix and match of this, depending on the state that you live in. It will be really interesting as well to see there's been a lot of politicians on the more left-leaning side saying that if Donald Trump were to win, they would refuse to acknowledge that he won, and they would prepare for civil war conditions, one senator from, I believe, California said. So it makes you think, like, what does that mean? What do you classify as civil war conditions? And really, like, what does it mean if you don't accept the results of that election? Very similar rhetoric like this is said a lot of times during come elections, and it just kind of panders out into nothing. It's just somebody, browbeating and beating their chest. It'll be interesting to see what that's actually backed up by, though, because I think a lot of people in the political power have a lot riding on this election as well, because the idea of drain the swamp, which, Trump didn't necessarily do the first time, he might come back with a vengeance and do this time, and puts them all out of a job, and they don't want to risk what they already have. And the good thing they got going. But we'll see. I could be entirely wrong on this. It could be a whole bunch of nothing. But from what a lot of people are saying, and a lot of people are seeing the cycles of violence kind of thing come up, a lot of people are assuming that basically the time between November 5th and Inauguration Day is going to be a very rough time. And I wouldn't be surprised if the administration that's already in charge, if they don't pull off some kind of tomfoolery to get Trump not elected, that they would try to start something or cause something on their way out to leave Trump with a big mess in his lap. For example, whether it be another conflict or some type of, military deployment or something like that, just cause some kind of worldwide crisis to where we have to step in and get involved, whether it's defense of Taiwan, whether it's Israel, whether it's Ukraine, whatever, to finally, they basically say, hey, we're going down with the ship. We're authorizing U.S. troops to go wherever. Now we're kicking something off, because then even if Trump does win, we have the war we want, and we'll make the money we need to make, and the powers that be will be satisfied, and we can feed all of the military-industrial complex. I could be entirely wrong on that, but that's just kind of where my mind goes with these things. So it comes down to, like, you as the modern Minuteman, right, seeing all these things around you, what do you do about it, right? How do you be prepared for this? And I think for this one, obviously, the first thing is to have a plan, right? First off, look at where you're at. Are you in a major city? If you are you in a major city in a blue? Are you a blue city in a red state, a red city in a blue state, vice versa? Like, where are you at, right? Like in my area, I'm in a rural red area, surrounded by a rural red area, and the closest big city to me is not even really blue. I'd say they're closer to purple when it comes to politics. They're about half and half conservative and liberal, just because it's kind of a larger college town, but there's a very large industrial base there too. So it's pretty conservative with slight liberal leanings. So I'm in an area that if something were to happen, the likelihood of violence is probably lower, or at least more limited. Now, if you're in an area like Seattle or San Francisco, LA, Chicago, New York, certain areas like this, there might be cause for riots. There might be cause for street violence, very similar to what we saw with BLM. and not only have it happen, but have it be encouraged by the local government as outbursts against a Trump election. So also with states authorizing National Guards, who knows to what that might develop into? I would hesitate to say full-blown martial law, but it might be, you might see things like National Guard setting up hard points of government installations while there's street violence going on, and maybe police not being encouraged to stop necessarily street violence until it necessarily affects the political elites. Who knows? But, you know, if you're living in one of these cities, I would think I would do a big threat assessment to see, hey, what is the likelihood of violence in my area realistically? How bad was it in 2020, whenever the BLM riot started? If something were to happen, do I have a plan, right? Like, obviously, election day is Tuesday. It's the middle of the week. Most of us are going to be at work. Is there any way that if something were to happen, that you have the availability to maybe get out of town, or do you have somewhere to go? Obviously, I think realistically, it's not going to be like things are just going to burst off overnight and that very night your town is going to be up in flames. It very well could be. You never know. Things change on a dime, but it'll probably be a slow rolling, heated political violence over time. But, should the worst come to worst and, maybe, the night of the 5th, they announce, hey, Donald Trump won, and then your town just, loses its shit and starts going haywire because you live in a blue town for some reason. Are you prepared to deal with that? Do you have a bug-in plan? Do you have a bug-out plan? Have you thought about what the implications of this might be? Because, what if you have to get to work the next day? Your life is probably not going to stop immediately. Most places around the world, even when instant violence like that happens, most people still have to get to work. They still got to pay their bills. They still got to do this kind of stuff. It's the violence is isolated. It's not, full-blown civil war. And heck, even in civil war, people still have to go to work, It's not like everyone's going to start living like some type of survival video game. You still have to get up, go to your job, pay your rent, get your bills, buy food. These things still have to happen. So what's your plan for this? Maybe it would be wise to beef up your EDC for the next couple of days, that time period over the holidays, just as things kind of happen, begin to happen. Maybe beef up your EDC, maybe make sure that your family's all on the same page, come up with a comms plan, come up with a evac plan if need be. Again, this is going to be dependent very heavily on where you're at. In the area where I'm at, my threat assessment, I think, is fairly low. I don't think there's a huge risk for political violence where I'm at, but we still have a plan in place just in case. We still have a communication plan in place just in case. There's been rumors going around of, certain enemy governments like China, for example, having the ability to shut down certain types of cell providers, things like this, right? Basically cutting off communication on the 5th, causing chaos on election day. Very high possibility that either our own government or foreign governments would seek to do something like this to somehow find a way around the election, to somehow cause a crisis that would either delay or deny the election in the first place. If something like that were to happen, do you have a plan set up? Do you have something in place that helps you get to your loved ones and prepare for whatever comes next? Then on top of that, do you have the necessary supplies and resources that you need? I'm not saying go out and dump a bunch of money tomorrow and panic buy. But what I will say is, for example, if you're looking for guns and ammo, I would say that if Trump wins, you're probably going to be all right finding guns and ammo, not that big a deal. If Kamala wins, I would say go get the guns and ammo that you need. The reason I say that is this. Working in the firearms industry for 5+ years, actually, I think it was probably closer to 6 or 7, I've seen every election cycle, whether it's a presidential election, whether it's we were voting for Congress, whatever. Every time something big political happens like this, you have a mad rush on guns and ammo. Not only do you have that just for the political purposes, but you are also entering the busiest season in the gun industry right now, where our busy season is basically from the beginning of hunting season to early spring, because everyone starts coming in, especially like after October, they're going to come in for in November and start checking stuff out because of the elections. You got Black Friday coming up. You got Christmas coming up. People are going to start dumping a bunch of money very quickly. Now, that's going to mean there's going to be a big rush already on guns and ammo. And there'll be an even bigger rush if the election doesn't necessarily go the way that I think it should. So if it does go the Kamala side, I think you're going to have a hard time in a couple days after the election, trying to find what you need. So if you don't have what you need, I would recommend scouting it out, seeing what you got, keep your money close, and depending on how Tuesday goes, boom, there you go. Also, that being said, I would also anticipate not to have a direct answer for who won the election on the 5th. On the 20th, we still had states coming in days later. I would say definitely expect that on Tuesday. That you're probably not going to have a 100% definite answer on Tuesday, I would say. I would say they're probably going to try to drag this out as much as possible. There's as much tomfoolery and finagling of this as they can to try to make this go their way. Could be wrong, and I hope I am. I hope that everybody listening to this on the 6th is like, this guy's retarded. But just going off of what I've seen, this is kind of what I'm thinking about. Also, I would say, regardless of how the election goes on Tuesday, if you have not met your neighbors or you are the outsider of your community, you need to get involved. Go meet your neighbors. Go make friends. Guess what? The holidays are coming up, and it's a great time for you to go introduce yourself for, simply just being like, hey, we wanted to get to know the neighbors, or we're doing a football party for, the Thanksgiving game, or as time go later in the season, Christmas caroling, whatever. You have a lot of excuses this time of year to go knock on neighbors' doors. That doesn't seem weird or out of place. So if you haven't already met your neighbors, please go do so. Build that community, because regardless of how Tuesday turns, no matter who wins, I honestly think things are probably going to get pretty rough for a little bit. Even if Trump does win, it's not like day one, when he gets elected, that things are going to immediately change for the better. Your groceries are still going to cost money. Your gas is still going to cost money. The economy is still going to be AIDS until he's able to institute policy, get it voted on, and get it implemented. So even if he were to get elected November 5th, you're realistically not seeing improvement probably for at least a year. So keep that in mind, that things don't magically change or magically become better just because it's a Trump presidency. They will take time. In that time, you need to get to know your community, because your community is going to be the cornerstone of your future, in my opinion, of how things are going to go forward. Also, the greatest way to prevent any type of political violence in your neighborhood or any type of violence breaking out in your area is to go meet those neighbors. It's a lot easier for strangers to turn on each other for perceived ideas of how they view you. If you live in an area where you have mixed political opinions between you and your neighbors, as long as you're on relatively decent terms, obviously you might have political disagreements, but as long as you guys can get along at the community barbecue, or the kids' birthday parties, things like that, it's a lot harder for that guy to want to cause you violence based on your ideology if he's actually friends with you. Look, I have friends that I don't agree with politically. I have friends I don't agree with religiously, but we get along together because we have mutual friendships that are based on things outside of politics and religion. And so even though we may disagree and we may have arguments, we can still get along with each other. And I don't see myself, going to war with that guy based on my ideology. So I would say, again, get tight with your communities. And, also take this time to go over your preps and over your stuff that you have and be like, all right, what am I actually prepared? What am I missing? What do I need? What do I need to put my priorities at right now to get ready? Also, while it is election season, it's also the changing of the seasons. Is your gear rated and ready for the fall, for the winter, for the colder weather and the wetter months? Depending on the part of the country you're on, it could mean more rain, it could mean more snow. It's going to mean colder weather all the way around. It just kind of depends on your climate. Have you switched out your gear from your summer stuff to your winter stuff? Have you switched out your light sleeping bag into your heavy set sleeping bag? Are you ready for that transition? Do you have your cold weather gear and your rain gear handy? Do you need to switch, weapons up? To do anything like that? Have you switched your stuff out for the changing of the seasons? Take this time as well while you're kind of reviewing some of the stuff and going over these lists to go do that. Because it is going into fall, we are going into winter that has different considerations, whether it comes to weather, whether it comes to the rifle you might carry, whether it comes to the gear in your go bags, things like this. Make sure that you've got all that stuff switched out too. Also, keep an eye on things in your area. Keep an eye on local news. Keep an eye around your neighborhood. And be prepared in case something does go down that you're not caught off guard by it in your area. You don't want to be the last guy to know, because I know a lot of us don't, a lot of us try not to watch the news constantly, or we try to stay out of it. just because, it's stressful. There's a lot of stuff going on. You got a lot of other things to worry about. It's hard to keep tabs on everything all the time. And honestly, most of the time, most of us just don't want to be in it because a lot of it's propaganda. I would say, however, though, that between November and January, maybe keep a tighter eye on recent events, maybe keep a tighter eye on certain things around the country, what's going on, what's happening, especially locally, especially if you're in one of these states that's authorizing the National Guard for around the elections. And just kind of keep a better tab on local events and what's going on. Make sure that your state doesn't pull a fast one and do some screwy stuff. You never know. Um, but moving from that, let's go to kind of, the stuff that you guys are probably more interested in, the juicy details, the fun stuff, right? Fun is a relative term with this. So let's say, things go south. Let's say no matter where the election stuff happens, things get spicy, things go bad, Civil War style territory. What does that look like? I think that realistically, when we look at this, you're probably not going to see immediate secession. It's not going to be like, oh, Trump is elected president and California is just like, oh, we secede, we're not American anymore. I'm not saying that won't happen, but I'm saying it's probably pretty unlikely that that's not going to happen. What I would imagine you start seeing is if, let's say, Trump wins, more left-leaning states kind of start to self-assess and reassess and kind of distance themselves from the federal government as much as possible, trying to not necessarily make themselves independent, but necessarily more separate themselves into becoming a little bit more self-aware or self-efficient to kind of more of a coalition between themselves to where they could try to defy a Trump-style presidency by either having their delegates not certify the electoral or, similar means of just kind of government defiance through there. Kind of what you saw in 2020 when you had Republican senators stand up and say, I refuse to certify the state's election, that I refuse this, Trump won, this was illegitimate. But seeing that coming from the left side, and seeing them pushing through state level laws that counter certain federal laws. Especially we saw certain things like when Roe versus Wade went through and it returned the right to the states, which realistically that's a right for the states to decide. Certain states immediately, encoded it into law out of spite. And so you see things like this happen, and I think you'll see more of it like that if it does become Trump presidency, that you'll see states kind of push through certain laws that give the state more power to defy the federal government, which will be interesting to see how that dynamic plays out and what the Supreme Court says about all of that. But again, if you're living in one of these areas, I would say, especially if you're in a state that would be more left-leaning, keep an eye about you. Keep an eye on your neighborhood, keep an eye, your wits about you, know what's going on in your area. So let's say again, this starts to go that kind of south. Certain blue states start saying, hey, we're going to kind of form this coalition against, this. We're not necessarily I'm not saying coalition like a military thing or anything, but like, hey, we're going to legislatively try to fight this as best we can, or say that we don't certify this, or we don't want anything to do with that. I think you might even get to the point to where you start seeing things kind of like how you saw at the border when we had the issue, I think probably like 6 months ago it was, whenever we had the issues at the border and certain states started spinning up their National Guards and their state patrols and state police and started, preparing them to go down to the border and to defy the federal government when the government told Texas that they couldn't defend their own border. I think you're going to see very similar style actions happen in these blue states where maybe they'll call up their National Guards, their state police, things like this. And what they'll do with them, not entirely sure. But I think you'll kind of see this more armed defiance in that regard, just not like actively out in attacking or, attacking government forts or, secession and kind of type stuff. Not like the first Civil War. I don't think you're going to have a red versus blue type of issue there. What I do think you will probably see is a lot more street violence like you saw during the BLM summers. You will probably see big city riots. You will probably see roving bands of groups of people on one side or the other. I would probably say more left-leaning than right, because we usually don't see riots from the right, but more left-leaning groups out there and, being politically violent, targeting people, having these giant, riots and beating up stores, which ironically will probably happen in the more blue left-leaning cities that support their ideology. You probably won't see a lot of that in big red areas, which is always kind of an interesting thing to look at, where these people are rioting and tearing down the very community that supports what they believe in. But that's probably realistically what you're going to see. It'll be interesting to see that dynamic, how it unfolds with having the National Guard spun up, having everybody ready and prepared, and see how that kind of falls down and how the federal government responds to that. Because you do have to remember, there is a gap between Trump being elected and him taking office. So he'll be elected November 5th, but he won't take office till January. And I think it's, he won't take office till election day. I mean, sorry, inauguration day in January. So there's plenty of time for the federal government to have a chance to step in, especially, let's say there is political violence. What would happen if Trump is elected on November 5th, doesn't take office till January, but the political violence escalates and some form of martial law is declared by the federal government to control things, or the federal government steps in certain areas and says, hey, we're in charge now to take care of this. How does that affect things? How does that change under Trump? What if Kamala, being the vice president, refuses to certify the election? How does this work out? And then on the other side of things, what if Kamala wins? If she wins, which I pray to God she doesn't, and I really don't realistically think she will, because the powers that be, things like the media and the newspaper and television agencies, things like this, they're all kind of leaning a little bit more towards the Trump side, or definitely just not helping Kamala. And so I think the powers that be, the powers that are in the know, the people that are in the know aren't really making it, they're not trying real hard to get Kamala to win. So I don't think she will. I think they've kind of given her up as a sacrificial lamb for this election. But for some reason, let's say she wins, I think there you will absolutely see a very concentrated effort by Republican governors and by Republican legislature across the board to be much more bold this time, I would hope, about calling this illegitimate and a fraud and leading to legal proceedings against it. I think that in 2020, the people that tried to stand up for that, I don't think the political climate was there to back them up. I don't think people were fed up enough yet with COVID and everything going on. I don't think there's enough pissed off people for them to have the backing that they needed to get it out, to reverse the election. But I think that in 2024, there's enough people across the board that if Kamala wins, I think there's enough people together that would collectively be like, no, that's not right. And enough people that would call it as a bullshit call, that the legislatures would hopefully have a chance to be able to go in there and actually do something about it. Now, if they didn't, I think you would also see much more effort in kind of coalescing certain type of coalitions between Republican governors, again, like we did see with the issue down at the border. You already had kind of the framework begin to be built between, I think it was 28 or 29 states, coordinating together to spin up National Guards for deployment cycles down to the border. So we already have kind of a basis and framework for this that the lefty states don't necessarily have. On top of that, you have the benefit of a lot of the red areas being, contiguous and basically touching all of each other and having ease of transport, things like this through them. So I think that if it did come to political violence, like full-on civil war, the red states do have at least an initial advantage. Obviously, the blue states, I think they have a population and manufacturing advantage. There's a lot of stuff that's centered in those areas, but it'd be interesting to see how that kind of plays out in battle lines redrawn over time. So overall, again, I think it's going to be interesting to see how this kind of all, comes together. I think most of us are, I don't necessarily want to use the word anxious, but I think most of us are kind of just waiting to see what happens. A lot of us are preparing for the worst case scenario. The media's ramped things up. You've had multiple assassination attempts on former President Trump. And it's one of these things where if these people are that scared about him becoming president, what will they do if he becomes president? How bad will things get? This is all also omitting the possibility that the federal government starts another war or starts another conflict or another major issue or crisis between November and January as kind of a screw you on their way out to hand Donald Trump a crisis that he has to deal with for the next 4 years. For example, if they kick off a war with Iran or China or, insert country here, it's not like he can just come in day one and be like, hold on, time out, let's reanalyze this. I know we've been at war for a couple months now, but we need to time out and pull this back. because that would kind of make us look weak. We would have to basically go in and either come to a negotiated settlement that makes us that's positive in our favor, which I'm not sure we could do in that short amount of time, or we have to go and fight the war and win. And so it'll be interesting to see kind of how it'll be interesting to see kind of how the cards fall for that as time comes. So again, as a person being prepared for this, I would just say if there's any point in time for you to kind of keep a better eye on the news, this is probably it. Pay attention to Tuesday, see what happens. Let's see how things go. If you notice that weird stuff where you're like, oh, that's odd that entire county was 100% Kamala or things like that, point it out. Keep tabs of that. Spread it around social media as much as you can. Like, show people what's going on. Also, that being said as well, be prepared for there to be a lot of fake stuff going around on social media, a lot of stuff to kind of stir everybody up, and have that sense to kind of know what's real and what's not. Unfortunately, that is kind of hard to do, but, kind of keep tabs on all of that. Don't spread the boomer memes that your Uncle Bob is sending you. Find some real information, fact check it, date it, look up stuff for yourself, kind of see what's going on. Make sure that you have what you need. Make sure you're stocked up, food, water, ammo, supplies. Make that community. Find your neighbors, buy radios if you need them. You don't necessarily have to go out and panic buy, because realistically, if you're waiting till Tuesday to start stocking up, it's too late, and no amount of panic buying is going to help you. But, brush off those skills, find your gear, go through your kit, make sure your stuff's ready. And I think more realistically than having your full battle rattle ready to go, check out your EDC. Make sure you're up to date on all of your stuff. Make sure you've got up-to-date medical supplies in your EDC kit. Make sure you've got full mags. Make sure you've, switched out whatever needs switching out. Maybe plus up your medical, maybe add an extra mag or something like that. You never quite know, especially if you're in an area where that potential for violence is higher. Make sure you're ready for that. Make sure you are ready for something potentially to happen. Make sure you have a plan, and always remember that, like, the best way to win a fight is to not get one in the first place, right? So especially if you're someone who likes to get political and you like to get caught up in the debates, things like that, take a chill pill, calm down, back off. Don't get involved in political arguments over the next couple of weeks. Don't get involved in that political fighting at Thanksgiving. Maybe, like, not start a fight about the election, but just kind of cool it on that. Really try to blend in with people as best you can and separate yourself from that violence. Don't be the guy that stands out. Don't become a target. Keep your wits about you. Get to know your neighbors, and, really just keep a better eye on what's going on, head on the swivel, that kind of thing. Expect there to be some type of slow boil between November to January that could potentially rise into something bigger. I don't think that realistically November 6th, you're going to see massive riots in the streets. You're probably going to see some. You're probably going to see, like, kind of how when Trump won the first time, there was people, bitching and moaning in D.C. and breaking Starbucks windows, things like that. So you'll probably see some, right? That is if we have all of the results back in time. So you'll probably see a little bit of violence limited in the beginning. I think it'll wear out pretty quickly, but it'll kind of just become, it'll be like a flash in the pan, but that spark will still be there, and that spark will slowly reignite over time between now and January, because I think that realistically the powers that be want something to start. They need a crisis to justify, action on their part between now and January. They need a reason to take back power, to take charge, to say, oh, no, we have to step in and take more power than we normally have before Trump gets in here, and we need something to either push back Inauguration Day or cause some type of delay, cause some type of issue that, there's some type of crisis that is more important than the election, and more important than the peaceful transfer of power. So we, for the government's own good, for the people's own good, we need to step in. They need something like that to happen. So expect, the media to be extra pushy on a lot of this, and expect that kind of them trying to, poke the bear and start something. With that, like I said, if you haven't got into a group, I would try to form one. If you haven't gone out and met your community, do it. If you are still looking for people, try to find your tribe as best you can, as quickly as possible. Get some training reps in. Ultimately, too, with that, don't think like you just have to stop living your life because you're worried that something will happen. Don't live in fear. Go about your daily life. Just be more prepared. Be more vigilant. Be more ready than normal, and just kind of be on a heightened sense of alert. Think of it like, If you're those guys in the military, think of it like your FPCon levels. In the military, we have FPCon levels, force protection conditions, right? Certain levels of how much of a possibility there's of a threat, and the things you do for that go higher, right? For example, if you work in a field that isn't any type of like law enforcement, security, anything like that, guarding anything important, military, that kind of thing, you generally have threat levels assessed to what the danger is in your area based on a variety of factors, right? I would say that for the next couple days, for sure, maybe be on a higher alert status. Make sure your family has a communications plan with you. What happens if your cell phone doesn't work? What happens if something happens and you're trying to get home? How do you communicate with people? What is your plan initially? Get that set in stone and get that set up as best you can and prepared as best you can with you and your family. Don't necessarily let it entirely distract you from enjoying the upcoming holidays either. Spend that time with your family, enjoy it while you can, because if things do get messy, you're going to want to have those positive memories. So make that time spend with your family, get close with them. I would say pray for our country if that's your thing. If it's not, I think it really should be. I think you should spend some time trying to get closer to God and pray for the nation. Prayer can change things, and hopefully we can prevent any issues from happening. And I'm really hoping that anyone listening to this November 6th, November 7th, November 8th, or later will listen to this and be like, man, that was just a crazy off-the-rails rant from a dude who has drank way too much caffeine today and has no idea what he's talking about. So I'm really hoping that's the case, and we can put all this behind us, and we have a nice, peaceful transition of power, and my kids don't have to live through any type of political violence or anything like that. I think, unfortunately, based on historical precedent and where we're at as a nation, that we're probably going to see something negative in the next couple of weeks, if not the next couple months. I would imagine I would be very surprised if there's not some kind of government surprise or mass riot, something like that, between now and January. I'd be very surprised if something like that doesn't happen. So with that, guys, again, this is a little bit shorter of an episode, but I just kind of wanted to put that out there, my advice and my thoughts on the upcoming election. Probably going to do another episode after the election to see kind of how things pan out and what I think and how things are going. So with that, guys, remember to check out Blackout Coffee. Check out www.makeyourthoughts.com as well for some awesome merch. And don't forget to check out our YouTube channel. Thank you so much for your time, guys, and we will catch you on the next one.